Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little bit about Vince McMahon's retirement plus SummerSlam. We're heading into SummerSlam today with the main event um, being Brock Lesnar versus um, Roman Reigns for the Universal Championship and the WWE Championship. Plus, this will be the historic SummerSlam, the first ever SummerSlam in the history of SummerSlams with no Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon last week he retired. He called it quits at 77 years old. Thank you, Vince, for all that you have done in the world of professional wrestling. I know that there's a lot of controversy going on right now regarding Vince. You know what I mean? The whole sex scandal thing and paying $13 million for the hush money of that one legal intern, and the fact that Vince might be facing jail time for these charges. But you know what? Triple H is taking over for creative. Last week's Raw just had Triple H involved. And you know what, guys? I cannot say that there's anything wrong with Vince. I mean, yes, Vince has had unfair business practices. Vince took over all the territories. Vince bought out WCW. He um, he engaged in unfair business practices in the 80s with Jim Crockett Promotions, and he did the same thing with WCW. Did he encourage a lot of his wrestlers to take steroids and other performance enhancing drugs that led to the um, led to um, the decrease in their life? Did he do all that? Yes, he did. But look at what other things he has done. If it were not for Vince McMahon, deal right now. Vince McMahon revolutionized the world of professional wrestling. Vince McMahon took wrestling to a global level. Did wrestling exist before Vince? Sure. Did it exist before his father? Sure. Wrestling has existed with us since even before the Greek and Roman times, going all the way back to the Egyptian and Babylonian times. And professional wrestling, as we know it today, has existed with us since the 1920s, since Toots Mott, Ed the Strangler Lewis, and Billy Sandow formed the Goldust Trio. But who was Tufman's student? Who was his partner in crime, his business partner? Vince McMahon Sr. So even since the very early days of professional wrestling, the McMahon family has been involved. So the McMahon family is still involved in professional wrestling. Stephanie and Triple H have taken over, but Vince himself, it was Vince's vision that actually brought the sport back from the doldrums in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s. Wrestling was localized. Wrestling was regionalized. You know, you had different um, bigger mainstay stars here in Louisiana, mainstay stars in the Carolinas, mainstays in Georgia. Yes, there was that national cable overlay since '75 with WTBS, but there wasn't that national promotion. NWA was one big conglomerate made up of several different separate territories that formed in 1948 in Waterloo, uh, Iowa. And a lot of times the NWA promoters couldn't even get it together. There was always infighting amongst them. For example, Sam Mushnick, the first president of the NWA, made sure that the belt was on Lou Thez, the main star in his St. Louis territory, for several decades. But it was Vince that said, you know what, we're going to end all this stupidity, because like if Paul Bosch owned a territory in Houston, let's say, um, Fritz von Erich, who owned the territory in Dallas and a city over in the next state, couldn't even compete with him. It was like um, it was more like communism and less like capitalism in a sense before Vince. And Vince just said, you know what, we're going to do away with all this. And instead of having the networks uh, pay us, or instead of us paying the networks for that TV time, the networks are going to pay us for our content. Because before that, wrestling shows was just to fill content in order so that they could sell tickets at the arenas. All it was really interviews, jobber matches, and filler segments. And look at some of those old WCW Saturday nights, even the 80s, that they have on the network. But it was Vince who had this idea of the networks are going to, instead of us paying the networks to put us on, the networks are going to pay us for our content and we're going to create great shows. And he also had the concept of pay per views, starting out with the closed circuit shows, which of course his dad had done in 73, 75, and 1980, respectively. 1980 was the one, excuse me, 76. 76 was the one with Antonio Inoki and Muhammad Ali, credited by many as the first modern MMA match ever. And that was also the night Bruno Sammartino returned from his neck injury to face Stan Hansen. And Chuck Webner, who was the inspiration for Sylvester Stallone's Rocky movies, faced Andre the Giant. And the match that he and Andre the Giant had was copied move for move in Rocky 3, which gave Hulk Hogan his start in 1982. But in the 1981, the 1980 showdown at Shea was the first time that Hulk Hogan, as a heel, managed by Classy Freddie Blassie, faced off against Andre the Giant. So Vince's father already had this concept of mega shows, and then Jim Crockett took it to another level in '83 with Starrcade, and then in 1985 Vince took it to another level with WrestleMania, bringing in the celebrities, bringing in Cyndi Lauper, bringing in Mr. T, bringing in Liberace, bringing in Billy Martin from the Yankees. All these people, March 31st, 1985, to create this mega show. And then from there, throughout the entire 80s, um, started creating other pay-per-views. Royal Rumble, like we talked about, in 1989. SummerSlam, the first SummerSlam at Madison Square Garden in 1988. Mega Powers, Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage versus Mega Bucks, Andre the Giant and Ted DiBiase, and revolutionized the world of sports entertainment. Then it did it again in the 90s, in 1993, creating Monday Night Raw, a live concept instead of these tape shows that he had done with Primetime, that he had done with Superstars Wrestling Challenge, Superstars on Saturday, Wrestling Challenge on Sunday. He was going to do a live show on primetime TV on cable in the Manhattan Center. It didn't really pan out for the Manhattan Center the next 2 seasons that they left and took it on the road. But, and it wasn't live all the time. Granted, Eric Bischoff had to push his hand 2 years later when he created Monday Nitro. But still, Vince was the Walt Disney of professional wrestling. He had the vision, just like Walt Disney had the vision in 1937, first in 1928 to create Steamboat Willie, the first animated short, and then in 1937 to create Snow White. Um, the first full-length animated feature, and nobody said that Walt Disney would ever be successful, and Walt Disney was absolutely successful up until the time he died in 1966, and he had the vision to create um, Walt Disney World 10 years before that, and he did, just like Vince. Vince is the quintessential in the late 20th century, just like Walt Disney was in the early 20th century, the quintessential American business mogul and mind in the entertainment world. And I feel like Vince doesn't really get that credit, guys. You know what I'm saying? It was him who took this industry that everybody always looked down on, this industry that people always made fun of. Because since 1935, when Jack Pfeffer exposed professional wrestling as being fake in the New York Times, Since that time, uh, everybody always looked down on professional wrestling. Always said that it was fake, it was phony, it was stupid. It was rumors that they used blood capsules, fake blood, and everything. So sports writers and stuff didn't want to be associated with it. A lot of people don't know that in the early 1920s, like when handsome Jim Londos was selling out arenas, um, like in 1925, 1926, 1927. Um, Wrestling was at one time covered just as much as boxing, especially in not so much in the 20s, but in the 30s. Because remember, and it used to be this thing in the American sports world, especially the combat sports world, where if boxing was popular and there was a lot of there were a lot of charismatic fighters, and especially one big name charismatic fighter in the game, wrestling was on the downswing, and then if boxing was on the downswing, wrestling had that same charismatic type fighter. Um, in the 1920s for boxing, it was Jack Dempsey, but after Jack Dempsey retired, by the way, Jack Dempsey in 1915 defeated Jess Willard, and Jess Willard earlier in 1915 defeated Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion, who Vince McMahon's grandfather, Jess McMahon, promoted. So there's that connection there. But anyway, in the 1920s, um, uh, when uh, Jack Dempsey retired, there wasn't anybody else, um, in the boxing world until Joe Louis came about that really excited people. So wrestling took over, and this guy, handsome Jim Londos, he was selling out arenas because he was a very attractive man. He was Greek. He was of Greek descent. Number one, that ties it in all the way back to ancient Greece, where basically organized wrestling began in the Olympics in ancient Greece, especially in the city state of Athens. So handsome Jim Londos, and he invented the airplane spin. He was the biggest star in the area of Madison Square Garden when Vince McMahon's father switched from Vince McMahon's grandfather, Jess, switched from boxing to promoting wrestling. Then, in the 30s, in the 40s, um, Joe Louis was popular. Then in the 50s, Rocky Marciano. Then Muhammad Ali, Frazier, Foreman in the 60s and 70s. But by the 80s, besides Mike Tyson, boxing was again on the downswing. And when Mike Tyson got the early 90s, when Mike Tyson got um, locked up and arrested and had his legal troubles, um, it was professional wrestling that picked up the swing, especially in the late 1980s, for the combat sports world. Um, there wasn't no MMA at that time. MMA didn't come about in the United States at least until 1993 with the first Ultimate Fighting Championship, and it was popular for a couple of years, like until 97, 98, and John McCain had it shut down. But during the late 1920s and early 1930s, Vince McMahon's grandfather started to get involved with professional wrestling, promoting Jim Rondos, because at that time in boxing, you had the Primo Carneros, the Max Schmelings, and the James J. Braddocks, who was pictured in that Russell Crowe movie Cinderella Man. And those guys weren't as charismatic as Manasseh Muller, Jack Dempsey. And I think Dempsey, um, for a while, was involved with wrestling. I know Marciano was, I know Joe Louis was, and of course Muhammad Ali was at the first at the first WrestleMania, and he had the MMA match with Antonio Inoki, and he had this one segment with Gorilla Monsoon. I think was like in '77, um, where Gorilla Monsoon airplane spinned him. So Muhammad Ali was a huge wrestling fan. We spoke about it in the Night of Miami video, where he credits Gorgeous George with his whole gimmick, his whole stick. But about this Vince McMahon thing, him retiring, this ain't the first time WWE faced legal troubles. Remember 1994, Vince was being brought up on child molestation charges because of Pat Patterson and Mel Phillips. Sexual harassment charges because of Barry O, Randy Orton's uncle. Um, and rape charges because supposedly he raped a female referee named Rita Chatterton in 1992. So, I mean, there's that video, um, that one video with Dave Meltzer and him, Dave Meltzer, um, Barrio, I think Superstar Billy Graham and Bruno Sammartino's on there, and they're talking about like Dave Meltzer has a crazier mullet than I got right now, and um, he's up there like it was right before WrestleMania 8 probably. He's up there. They're up there talking about that issue. So that was a big thing from 1992 to 1994, and Vince got out of it. You all remember coming out with the neck brace, gloating that Jerry McDivitt had gotten him off. But it seems like it's sort of like Michael Jackson in a way. Michael Jackson had gotten off in 1993 with the Jordy Chandler allegations, and then the Jordy Chandler stuff blown away. He did the History album, he did Blood on the Dance Floor, he did a whole bunch of stuff, and then in 2003 he had the Martin Bashir documentary, and then in 2005 Gavin Arvizo comes along, and then Gavin Arvizo um, brings up these charges again. So all of a sudden now they're coming after Vince. But anyway, um, so they got to have somebody to pick on. What did Richard Nixon say after um, he lost the 1960 election to JFK? He said they're just mad because they won't have Richard Nixon to kick around anymore. Well, if Vince McMahon's out of the game, we won't have Vince McMahon to kick around anymore. We won't have him to blame for the ills of professional wrestling, the professional wrestling industry. I guess they're going to have to kick around Rick Moranis' Pakistani twin brother, Tony Khan, because he's now the HNIC. He's now the head boss in charge. Him or Triple H. Hell, they gave Triple H a whole bunch of hell in the early 2000s when he was on top of the world. Remember the Reign of Terror, guys? But anyway, enjoy SummerSlam. My prediction is that Roman Reigns will walk away victorious. Ain't nobody beating Roman at least until The Rock comes back for WrestleMania 38. Excuse me, WrestleMania 39 in Hollywood. The Rock, Hollywood. I mean, he's The Rock. He's the biggest star to come out of professional wrestling. He's bigger than Gorgeous George. He's bigger than Jim Londos. He's bigger than Luthez. He's bigger than Bruno. Bigger than Hogan. Bigger than Cena. Bigger than Austin. Bigger than anybody. And he's taking on his cousin Roman Reigns. And Roman Reigns was already in Hobbs and Shaw, the Fast and the Furious spinoff. You know what I mean? So, and there's talk about Sasha Banks coming back. Sasha Banks and Naomi coming back because now Vince is gone and John Laurinaitis is gone. The craziest thing about this whole thing is that with John Laurinaitis and fucking Vince sharing a woman together and like running a trade on this bitch. You know, like when I read that, I'm like, yo, Vince out there running trains on hoes now? No. Come on, Lord. You gotta pick up speed, brother. You know, come on, that's crazy, man. Crazy. Um, anyway, guys, enjoy SummerSlam. Yeah, SummerSlam always gets me pumped, man. Uh, I think back to SummerSlam 1994, Owen and Brett in the cage. Um, even the, I was just interacting the other day on Facebook with Chris Chavis, aka Tatanka, Native American Tatanka, on Facebook, and telling him that when I was like 11 years old, man, and they did that storyline with him and him and Luger, and I was into it, man. Like my stepdad was telling me the whole time that uh, Tatanka was going to turn, but I thought Luger sold out, man. I'm like, Luger is down with Ted DiBiase. It was hella obvious, but turns out Tatanka turned heel. And in retrospect, it probably wasn't the best move for Tatanka because he kind of lost his momentum. Some would say he lost his momentum earlier in '93 when he, in the lead up to Survivor Series '93 when he lost his streak to Ludwig Borger. But I say that's when he lost his momentum because he still could have got his momentum back, and he never really won a championship. He or Lex Luger in the WWF, and then of course he had his own legal issues. Him and Jimmy Del Rey back in '95. Go read James Dixon's book Tight Sinking for that. Um, but it was like Ahmed Johnson, one heel turn, and he was just derailed. You know what I mean? But I was into that storyline. That was probably the number one storyline that I was into that summer. That and Undertaker versus Undertaker. My stepdad was telling me, he was like, "That's not the real Undertaker." You remember the real Undertaker when the Taker came out in '90 in Survivor Series 1990? But I was like, "Nah, that's the real Undertaker." Come to find out, he was right. It wasn't the real Taker. Uh, uh, Ted DiBiase was just lying. But that's one of my favorite WrestleManias. I mean, SummerSlams, and of course, 1993 USS Intrepid. Lex Luger body slams Yokozuna uh, on the 4th of July. Comes out as a babyface. We talked about it in the 4th of July video. Um, that had a big match feel. That had a boxing esque feel. And I liked the Mr. Perfect Shawn Michaels match. It wasn't the best that Mr. Perfect or Shawn Michaels ever did, but it was pretty cool. And it was one of the first um, uh, summers that I had spent with my parents at that time. And, I had a lot of memories, watching that. And I was really getting into wrestling at that point in '93. So that was one of my favorites. Another one of my favorite SummerSlams, this is from when I was an adult, 2005. I kind of I went to WrestleMania in 2004. Um, Me and a couple of friends saw Chris Benoit win the World Championship. So Eddie Guerrero retain the WWE Championship um, against Kurt Angle, and I kind of fell away, stopped watching, especially after Eddie Guerrero lost to freaking JBL. My first YouTube screen name in the late 2000s was JBL Sucks, or JBL is live sucks, right? Because I was so pissed off that JB fucking L, won uh, the WWE Championship from Eddie Guerrero, and Eddie Guerrero had so much momentum. But anyway, so I fell off in 2004, and I'm doing my thing. I'm doing my thing. I was heavily into Islam at that point. I was really practicing Islam heavily, um, and at that time, I was about to have my daughter. You know what I mean? So uh, I really wasn't paying attention to wrestling at that point. And then somebody told me, and it was a matter of fact, it was at one of the Jumas, um, Islamic prayer services that uh, I go to. Somebody was like, "Yeah, you're gonna watch SummerSlam this week. Um, Hulk Hogan is taking on Shawn Michaels," and I'm like, "Yo, if you grew up in the '90s, especially when you went to school and you went to school the next day, and you couldn't wait to talk about Nitro and Raw with your friends." It was like DX versus NWO, man. It was all about DX versus NWO. We talk about it in the '90s video, factionalism and stuff. And that was one of the biggest events. You know, one of the biggest dream matches, Hulk Hogan versus Shawn Michaels. So I'm like, yo, I gotta watch it, and that's when I jumped back into watching professional wrestling, and that lasted for a couple of months until they did the God storyline with Vince and Shawn Michaels, and then Kane and Big Show became the champions, and then the Spirit Squad. And I stopped watching again until after Benoit died in '07. Um, and then I jumped back in, through online, and I kept watching, kept watching, kept watching. And then in 2017, um, I went with my son to see Bruce Pritchard and Conrad Thompson uh, live show. We watched. Well, we didn't actually go to the event SummerSlam, but we watched it later on. It was a weak SummerSlam, you know what I mean? But it was still a memorable moment. Um, so those three stuck out to me: '94, 2005, and 2017. Um, '06 was around. I think '06 was in Boston when Hulk Hogan took on Randy Orton. Um, 91 always stuck out to me because I wasn't watching really professional wrestling at that time in '91, but I would go to the video store and I would rent the tapes, and I rent a whole bunch of tapes. And when I watched '91, uh, it was so cool that Sergeant Slaughter, the Iraqi storyline, and uh, Ultimate Warrior literally chasing out all the heels, and the storyline with Sid. Is Sid going to turn? We talk about it kind of in the 1992 year in review video. Man, and a match made in heaven and a match made in hell. Man, Randy Savage marrying Elizabeth, one of those moments in the history of professional wrestling that really sticks out. And again, I go back to the original premise of this video. All these memories that we have, even when me and my son went to the live show, all these memories that we have of wrestling, right, with our family, with our friends, when we went with loved ones. I went to WrestleMania um, 29 uh, with a loved one really close to me that passed away. I went to, uh, like I was saying, either went to or watched my stepdad a lot, in the early 90s, close to me memories. All these memories that we had that um, surround professional wrestling and around professional wrestling and revolve around professional wrestling is because of Vince McMahon. He's given us that platform to enjoy that and to make those memories. It's just like music. You have a song, you have a nostalgic song, so you listen to Motown, or say you listen to Gamble and Huff, or say you listen to Led Zeppelin. A lot of people watching Stranger Things a couple of weeks ago, and they were brought back to those early days. At least I was too, when during the summers, like in '96, '97, '98, listening to Metallica with a friend, Jason Whittle, who came over us. You know what I mean? So those moments in professional wrestling trigger your memory of when you spent it with your loved ones. And it wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for Vince. So all that stuff with Vince, yeah, he's getting into some legal trouble, and he should pay the price because, come on, nobody should be able to do that and get away with it. I mean, not in the United States of America anyway. Rule of law. We talked about it in a lot of the videos regarding Magna Carta, regarding the Constitution, regarding the Mayflower Compact, and everything. You know what I mean? So, um, but still, you know, still, he created the memories and created these magics. And one thing, magical moments. One thing is Vince McMahon and WWE and WWF. They're multi generational, man. It's something that you can watch with your children, that you watch with your parents, that their grandparents watch. Everybody in the family watch. We all grew up watching professional wrestling. It's a real slice of Americana. I said it was never the focus of American pop culture, and it really wasn't. But it was something for families to enjoy. And Vince McMahon was the architect of creating those moments and memories. So I wouldn't disrespect Vince at all in that sort of way and say that I'm glad that Vince retired. You know what I mean? Because Vince is the man. Like, if y'all love Marvel Comics, you're gonna credit Stan Lee. If y'all love Game of Thrones, you're gonna create credit George R. Martin. If y'all love Star Wars, you're gonna credit George Lucas. These are the men behind it. These are the men of the vision behind it. You know what I mean? And if you enjoyed that with your children and with your moms and dads and with your friends and family, cousins or whatever, then those are going to be the moments that you're going to enjoy. Anyway, you guys, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see my next videos coming out. Love y'all.